As the Philippines reaches its final week in campaigning for its midterm elections, a Chinese national with surveillance equipment was captured near the Election Commission. The Chinese embassy in Manila stands accused of funding online troll farms to sway Philippine public opinion, and Philippine media received fake news about remarks from then U.S. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz pushing Sara Duterte's impeachment. How may these be connected? What might China be up to? And why is Beijing so interested in these midterms? Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Yin Khvat. Joining us today are Renato Cruz de Castro, de La Salle University Department of International Studies, Distinguished Professor and Ministry of Foreign Affairs Visiting Fellow at National Chengchi University, and William Vocke, Western Pacific Fellowship Project Vice President. Very warm welcome to both of you on the show today.
Thank you.
China's Xinhua agency on April 16th picked up on negative March survey results for Ferdinand Marcos Jr., despite a more recent survey from the beginning of April showing very different results. In a Pulse Asia research survey from March 23rd to 29th among 2,500 respondents, President Marcos's approval rating was at 25%, with disapproval at 53%. In contrast, Vice President Sara Duterte had a 59% approval rating and 16% disapproval. However, in the more recent Okta research survey from April 2nd to 5th, Marcos's trust rating was at 60%, down 5% from November 2024. His performance satisfaction was at 59%, also a 5-point decrease from his rating in November. In contrast, Duterte's trust rating increased 9 points to 58%, while her performance satisfaction increased 8 points from 56% over the same period. Renato, let me come to you first. How should we assess the differences in Marcos's ratings in these two surveys?
Well, chances are, of course, depending on where the respondents were, of course, chosen. You know, if Pulse Asia chose most of the respondents in Mindanao, chances are, of course, given the decision of President Marcos to send his predecessor for a great vacation at The Hague, you have, of course, this reaction coming from Mindanao. On the other hand, probably, of course, the Okta research, again, I'm guessing, probably have conducted this survey, nationwide. So probably it got a more balanced rate. Again, depending on where the survey has been conducted and where most of the respondents came from.
Right. And interesting that China's Xinhua news agency, of course, picked up the negative news story.
Yeah, of course, yeah. They're not very happy with the current president right now.
Right. And William, so these surveys assess the top officials in the Philippines, so obviously the president and the vice president. But how do polls like this, do you think, reflect on the midterm campaign election that's going on?
The polls tend to give a spot, a slice in time of what people are thinking and happening, rather than affect what people will do with the election. So I don't think they're going to impact the elections. They do show that there will be a change in the elections, though.
Right. Well, what sort of change do they show?
As with most midterm elections generally have an anti-incumbent view to them. There's generally a downturn in the president's party, regardless of which party the president is.
Right. And Renato, so talk to us about the Marcos Duterte influence in Philippine politics and also on the midterms. How crucial are these midterms in terms of the presidential race in 2028?
Well, it's very crucial. Again, as mentioned earlier by Bill, it will be a sort of a referendum regarding the performance of this administration. Of course, this administration had made dramatic changes in terms, number one, of course, of making sure that Philippine democracy is revitalized in terms of assuring the rule of law, in contrast to the last 6 years, where you have, of course, efforts to basically unravel Philippine democracy as reflected by extrajudicial killings, so forth and so on. And of course, the other element there, of course, is foreign policy. 6 years of the Duterte administration, you have efforts to basically appease, gravitate closer to China, whereas right now, the current administration is bent on, really challenging China's maritime expansion and, of course, emphasizing the importance of our alliance with the United States and security partnerships with other like-minded countries.
So how would you summarize China's interest in these midterms?
Well, again, they're not very happy with the dramatic change. You know, in the last 6 years during the Duterte administration, they thought they had the Philippines as a cat in their bag. You know, we're finished. We're just no different from Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar. Then suddenly you have this dramatic decision to basically challenge China, as seen in what's happening in the Balikatan 2025, where, of course, you have efforts to allow the armed forces of the Philippines, and, of course, with the engagement with the United States Armed Forces, to shift the alliance from simply in terms of, United States providing assistance to the Philippines and honoring its treaty commitment to what they call a classic example of developing deterrence against whatever China's action would be in the South China Sea and more significantly in Taiwan in the near future. So China has all the interests when it comes to this midterm election.
Right. And William, I'd like to get your view. You're a long-time Taiwan observer, of course. How would you compare China's interests, in the Philippine electoral democracy versus in Taiwan's democratic scene?
Well, they're of a similar nature. China is engaged globally in a soft power and a information program to try to assert its role in the world as one of the premier powers, if not the future hegemon of the world.
Would you say that it is as interested in or intervening, perhaps, in the Philippine democratic process as Taiwan, or is it
No, I don't think so. Taiwan is considered, from the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party perspective, it's considered internal part of China. And Taiwan is always one of the red line issues, one of the crucial issues for them. The Philippines is crucial because of the South China Sea and because of its role in ASEAN economically.
And because of its role in a possible Taiwan crisis.
Correct.
Renato, Sara's father, Rodrigo Duterte, is now facing trial at ICC in The Hague for his alleged crimes against humanity during the war on drugs. Now, Manila aided in Duterte's arrest on March 12th, and Beijing, we know, criticized the ICC or warned it against politicization and double standards. So what I want to know is, the impact of his arrest on the midterm election has been debated. I mean, he's actually standing for mayor of Davao. But, for example, have the Dutertes managed to change this issue about his arrest and his alleged crimes into something that's more about Philippine sovereignty? This is what some analysts in the Philippines are saying.
Well, we have to admit that he was a very popular leader and has been very popular even though he's already out of office, especially in Davao and in Mindanao. And of course, you also have a number of, supposed to be, there's a Senate hearing regarding, of course, the troll farms that the Chinese embassy has been funding. It's been exposed by Senator Tolentino. So you have this operation going on to basically project what happened, the arrest of former President Rodrigo Duterte, and of course his being deported to The Hague, as basically an infringement of Philippine sovereignty, which is of course simply not the case, especially in Mindanao. But this is something we will see in the election, in next week's election, whether it will have an impact not only in Mindanao, Davao, but all over the country.
Okay. Now, over 5,000 sets of personal data from mobile numbers have been harvested from spy devices seized outside the headquarters of the Philippine Commission on Elections, or COMELEC. The devices were found within the vehicle of a Chinese national identified as Tak Hoi Lau. The National Bureau of Investigation said the spy devices included a suspected International Mobile Subscriber Identity, or IMSI, catcher, a surveillance device capable of mimicking cell towers to intercept calls, texts, and track phone locations. The personal data had been collected from several offices, including the Supreme Court, Department of Justice, Villamore Air Base, Bureau of Internal Revenue, as well as COMELEC. The Election Commission said none of its systems were compromised, saying election data was not stored at that office. William, what else do we know about this case? What do you think were the goals behind it?
Well, the goals behind it are twofold. One is clearly an intervention in the domestic politics of the Philippines. The other is classic espionage, trying to collect information that has to do with military or economic policies, secrets, provisions for the future from the Philippine government. As Dr. Castro said, the new relationship or the renewed relationship between the United States and the Philippines under the current President Marcos is something that China finds to be very disquieting. And any information they can collect on that is information that they find useful.
Right. And so, Renato, to what extent can we say it's Beijing or state-backed?
It is. You just look at the equipment. And it's not the first time that the National Bureau of Investigation had basically captured, operatives having that very expensive device. This is the second time. First one, of course, involved gathering electronic information from the United States Embassy in Manila, and of course also in terms of the camps. So we see a pattern, the fact that the pattern has been the use of, interestingly, Chinese nationals who are already embedded in Philippine society. The two suspects who were caught were already married to Filipinas. So they have been there in the country for some time. Then, of course, the provision of a very expensive equipment that could be used to, mimic a cell site and gathering really a lot of electronic or signal intelligence.
And William, we know that China arrested 3 Filipinos in Hainan for spying, they say. How would you compare the goals of so-called Philippine spying in China, in Hainan, versus Chinese spying in the Philippines?
Well, assuming they were spies, which we don't know, it could have been that they were arrested simply as a quid pro quo, an attempt to then get some leverage in an exchange of people who had been arrested. Filipinos spying in China, in my uneducated view on this, are unlikely to be spies.
Let's get your view.
I just want to quote the National Defense Secretary Gibot Teodoro when he said, "What can we get from conducting, we don't have the capability. If you conduct intelligence operation, you have to have the capability to do so. So what if we get to know Chinese ports, Chinese destroyers? We cannot do anything." But they have all the motives to conduct espionage operation in the Philippines. The fact that, of course, we're the target of their expansion, and of course, they're looking at our alliance with the United States, American forces that are, of course, being deployed in the Philippines, equipment, EDCA sites where, of course, American forces are storing their equipment, and possibly, of course, the interaction going on inside the Camp Aguinaldo and the Mutual Defense Board.
Okay. Now, Philippine National Security Advisor Eduardo Ano has dismissed as fake a memo making rounds on social media about a conversation between Ano and then U.S. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. It states that the U.S. wants the Philippine government to prioritize the impeachment of Vice President Sara Duterte to, quote, manage the political risks to the leadership of Ferdinand Marcos Jr. Political risks, quote, that could not be ignored. The letterhead bore the name the National Security Council. So, William, how serious is this disinformation? And again, what's behind it?
Well, it's the same kind of process we just talked about. It's serious information. It's serious disinformation. They chose Mike Waltz because he is noted as a very strong hawk against China in the American government. He was chosen as the target of this false memo, simply as a way of, in part, discrediting him and discrediting his position, but also discrediting the National Security Advisor.
Renato, do you have comments on that issue?
Again, it's not the first time it happened. There was even a memo basically announcing that our ambassador to the United States, Ambassador Babes Romualdez, was conducting a lot of fishy businesses in Washington, D.C. Again, it was proven as a fake. So it's not new.
Right. And again, to what extent do we know that it's Chinese or China-backed?
We don't have a smoking gun evidence. Basically, again, in actions like this, covert operations like this, you always have the element, of course, of deniability. And you make sure that it stays in the gray area where people could not basically determine where did this come from. But again, when you talk in terms of circumstantial, who has the greatest motive, basically, to create disorder and discord within the Philippine government? No other than, of course, China.
Right. And William, what impact might, because there's some speculation for the reason for why Mike Waltz was promoted to ambassador to the UN. And one of the speculations is that he wasn't sufficiently MAGA. He didn't sufficiently align with the MAGA vision. If this was the case, and there was a more MAGA person in this role, what do you think the impact would be on U.S. security alliances, in the Indo-Pacific particularly?
Well, we'll have to see where the person who becomes national security, because currently it's Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, is now holding 4 hats. But he's unlikely to continue that hat. The one group in America that is very closely associated, for instance, with Vice President Vance, is a more nationalist, isolationist MAGA group. And if it comes from that group, it'll have a significant impact upon how America deals with alliances around the world, Taiwan, Philippines, and whether or not they're very
so broadly
proactive against China.
Broadly speaking, what kind of impact? Which way would they go?
If it's Vance-backed, it would mean a withdrawal of support. It would mean an expectation that the Philippines does more on its own. It would mean that the United States is less likely to be providing facilities, bases, money, military support. That whole group harks back to the America First movement prior to World War II.
And Renato's, Waltz or the U.S. saying that, telling the Manila to prioritize, the impeachment of Sara Duterte. What kind of impact does this have, even though it's been debunked?
Well, I don't think it had any impact. Again, because of the fact that the government, the National Security Council, reacted right away.
Could it actually have had a positive reaction?
Yeah, in a way, yeah. So then people become aware that, they have a covert operation being conducted against the Philippine government.
So therefore, do you want to jump in?
Well, just the point that in the way the news cycle works now is that whatever the scandal is, whatever the accusation is, gets big news. The denial of it or the rebuttal of it, which comes a day or two, et cetera, later, often doesn't get the same level of news. So it's an attempt to change the whole perception, the whole basis upon which the election is run, and to make it seem like that Philippines is, as you stated so eloquently at the start, losing its sovereignty.
Yeah, and to overcome that, of course, Renato, we have also seen, for example, when I was trying to find the original memo that had been circulating on social media, it appears to have disappeared. And what we have instead is the rebuttal.
Rebuttal, yeah.
So the Philippines is actually quite savvy in this respect.
Yeah, the reaction, immediate reaction of the Presidential Communication Office and, of course, the National Security Council.
Yeah. So an attempt,
Right.
William, to overcome what you were saying is what normally happens.
That's exactly right.
In the media cycle. Okay. Philippine Senator Francis Tolentino has presented evidence from an investigation showing a contract between the Chinese embassy in Manila and a local firm, Infinitus Marketing, to provide a cyber army of keyboard warriors. The firm reportedly was paid more than $16,000 to run pro-China online campaigns. Monthly reports from the marketing firm seen by media indicate one of the narratives being pushed is to inculcate to Filipinos that China and the Chinese people are a big part of our growing economy and our culture. Without them, we still will be a backwater country. Without China, many Filipinos will still be dirt poor. Without China, hundreds of millions of Filipinos will be jobless, unemployed. Now, the firm, whose co-founder is Paul Lee, a Chinese businessman, also stressed in their narratives how China has invested and donated much to the country since the 20th century. Infinitus denies all of the allegations. Renato, how do you view this news? Are there any precedents for this?
Well, again, this is a continuation of the Duterte administration narrative, that we have to really appease China, do everything that is necessary for China, because we could not survive as a nation without Chinese economic assistance or largesse. So again, it's a continuation that China is an important economic partner. We cannot challenge China, so might as well appease China and, of course, ensure that everything would be stable. It will always be a case of peace at all costs, simply because, we have to take into account the role of China in Philippine economy, which is, of course, simply does not have any basis.
So peace over an economy over sovereignty.
Yeah, that's it.
Sense. Yeah. William, so with these kind of narratives, can we see that Beijing is deliberately targeting the very poor the poorest who have to make ends meet, who perhaps care less about sovereignty in the West Philippine Sea?
Well, certainly they're targeting economic issues. And we have to admit that there's an element of truth to it. I mean, good propaganda always is based upon an element of truth. Yeah. And China is a really, really important part of the Philippine economy. It's a really important part of the economy of most of the nations of the ASEAN, Southeast Asia. So they certainly clearly are targeting that portion of the population. And many people can see that when they see jobs coming, when they see the Philippines exporting to China, or when they see cheap goods coming from China.
And Renato, interestingly, want to ask your opinion. Fishermen, of course, would be probably in this category. How do they see China? Do they see China as indispensable, or do they see them as taking away their fishing territory?
I think those Filipino fisher folks who venture, for example, to the Scarborough Shoal and to the South China Sea, they have a totally different opinion of China. And of course, going back to this Chinese narrative of, economic, where you need us because of economy, also resonate with the Filipino-Chinese business community. So some of those business group have, of course, certain subsidiaries in China. So for them, our economic relation with China could not be sacrificed on the altar of national sovereignty.
What percentage of the population are these Chinese?
Very small, but they own, for example, retail trade, finance, they're Filipino-Chinese. But again, we cannot categorize the Filipino-Chinese as pro-Beijing. Again, they're very pragmatic, but of course, once you have that message, they always take into account. And at the end of the day, as a business person, profit really matters.
Right, absolutely. And they're probably not a homogenous group anyway. William, let's talk about the false identities. There were hundreds of fake social media accounts posing as students, business people, also members of the armed forces of the Philippines. Why do you think these identities in particular were targeted?
Those were places where elites would come from and people would look to for validation of the information that's coming out. So you go to places, students, professors, members of the armed forces, journalists, who have some credibility in society. And that's obviously why those identities were selected.
Okay. Renato, in your view, is Chinese infiltration getting more and more sophisticated?
Yes, they have all the resources, they have all the motives. Plus, of course, you also have a lot of Filipinos who actively collaborate with them. During the hearing of Senator Tolentino, he was mentioning about Filipinos who are, of course, actually based in China. They're, of course, using social media. There are not a lot of them, but, they simply have nothing else to do while studying in China or being pampered by their Chinese hosts, just to basically come out with pro-Chinese narrative.
Okay. Now, Balikatan 2025 is practicing warfare across all domains, including cyber. Philippine and American troops are participating in a cyber defensive exercise, or CyDex, to simulate, quote, real-world scenarios, share best practices, and develop coordinated response strategies to defend critical information infrastructure. Now, the AFP said the exercise was a key component of this year's Balikatan decide to strengthen mutual cyber defense capabilities and enhance interoperability in meeting digital challenges. In January 2025, it was revealed that the President's office, that's Marcos Jr., and Defense Department had come under attack from a, quote, persistent campaign of cyber attacks by highly organized, experienced, and resourced operator. William, how do these kind of cyber operations fit into the bigger context of Chinese influence operations?
They're part of the whole panoply of activities that China is engaged in. The cyber operations exercise that the Filipinos and the Americans are engaged in is a new dimension of the relationship in terms of countering those activities. And it's from a China perspective, it's simply part of the Chinese global soft power initiative. And they're very effective at it. I think I ran the Fulbright program at one time, and when I ran it, we were very aware that the best way for Taiwan to present itself to the world was simply to let Americans come to Taiwan and enjoy it. It's a very, very difficult place to dislike. And that is not true of China. China basically has to go on the offensive. Foreigners who come to China often feel that they're being watched, and they are, that they're being monitored. So China has to work very hard at this. It has a harder time with soft power than democracies do. And both the Philippines and the United States and Taiwan have an advantage in that regard. So China's offensive is real, it's strong, it's well-financed, sophisticated technologically, and it's dangerous.
Renato, final question. So we talked about what China's interest is in this midterm elections. It's to shape essentially the presidential election going forward. It wants somebody who is perhaps not Marcos as the next president. Now, a year ago, you told me that Sara Duterte is not Rodrigo Duterte. If she becomes president, what do you think will be her China policy? Will it be appeasement?
Well, I can't really say so because she's still different from her father. Her father is actually more anti-American than pro-Chinese. She has never been anti-American, but of course, what will really matter would be the people who would probably appoint, just in case, let's knock on wood, if she gets elected. She simply doesn't have the political acumen. You know, whether you like Rodrigo Duterte or not, you cannot basically deny he's a sophisticated, charismatic leader. Charisma is not something that you inherit.
And what would it mean for the West Philippine Sea?
Again, it depends again on who will be the people that will be surrounding her. Unlike her father, she would have to rely on advisors. Rodrigo Duterte couldn't care less about his advisor. He's a type of person no different from Donald Trump, who would make decisions with minimal consultation with her advisors, with his advisors, I'm sorry. Sara Duterte will be a different breed of, you know, a leader.
William, did you want to have any final comments?
Well, we don't know that she will be the next president.
Beijing is probably hoping this.
Yes.
This is what this is.
I think from both the Taiwanese and American perspective, we've been happy with Marcos as president, and would hope that that would continue under whoever his successor is.
Okay, we'll have to end it there. Thank you so much to Renato, Cruz de Castro and William Vocke for joining Taiwan Talks today. If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching the show today. Stay safe and see you next time.